When Jesus had finished speaking, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. A simple yet powerful description of the moment that Jesus died. You know, when the Gospels describe the life of Jesus and his ministry, they often tell us many details of his ministry, his final week, his last hours on the cross. But when they describe the moment Jesus died, they keep it simple. One verse, one sentence. John says he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Matthew, Mark, and Luke just simply say he drew his last breath. 6 hours of suffering on the cross, and then with this one breath, it was all over. Now, does that strike you as a bit anticlimactic? Perhaps you were expecting a little more drama the moment Jesus died? Now remember, his death in some ways was a lot like ours. That is, you take your last breath and it's over. But there was something special about his death, as we well know, and thus no surprise that behind the scenes there was some supernatural drama. We're told in the Gospels that a darkness settled in on the land during the crucifixion. Matthew says it started at the 6th hour. He's using the Jewish way of doing time, starts at sunrise, and the 6 hours would be 12 noon. It lasted for 3 hours until the 9th hour, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the moment that Jesus died. This darkness was not a natural phenomenon, it was a supernatural thing. It was God putting an exclamation point on all the things that had happened there at Calvary. Second thing we're told is that at the moment Jesus died, the temple veil was torn from top to bottom. Now, the temple veil we're referring to is the curtain that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, the inner chamber, where the presence of God was supposed to be. This was the curtain that kept everyone out. All priests had to stay out. The high priest entered once a year, only for a few minutes, and then he too had to exit. But when Jesus died, the curtain was ripped. Top to bottom indicates it wasn't the hands of men, it was the hands of God. And he opened up the way into the Holy of Holies, into the presence of God. And why? Because Jesus' death, the shedding of his blood, the sacrifice he offered, was an atonement acceptable to God, an atonement that allows sinners like us to enter into the presence of God through Jesus Christ. We're also told a great earthquake took place at that time. And with this earthquake, something rather odd happened. Only Matthew tells the story. But Matthew says that some of the tombs of some of the saints who had been buried near Jerusalem, their tombs opened up. And after the resurrection of Jesus, some of them came out of their tombs, went into the city, at least long enough for people to see them, for them to testify to the power of God, the life that resides in God and his power. And then at some point, they'll go back to their tombs. At some point, they'll be gone. But they added an interesting twist to the resurrection story of Jesus. Now, the moment Jesus died was a sobering moment. The Roman soldiers were frightened. That's what the text tells us. The Centurion and all the other soldiers who stood there with him, guarding over Jesus and the two thieves that were being crucified, when they witnessed the earthquake, when they saw everything else that had happened in relation to the crucifixion of Jesus, it says they became very frightened. Even the crowd was humbled when the moment of death came. They had watched the proceedings. They had listened to the words of Jesus. And it says that when they left beating their breast, a sign of being humbled by what they had been in the presence of. Now, the burial for Jesus had to be done quickly. Quickly because it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. In just 3 hours will be sundown. And for the Jews, in the way they do business, sundown is the beginning of the new day. You and I start at midnight, in the middle of the night, when we're in bed asleep. They start at sundown. That's the new day. And the new day after Good Friday was going to be the Sabbath. The Jewish leaders wanted the bodies off the cross before the Sabbath begins. John chapter 19 tells us this was the day of preparation, getting ready for the Passover Sabbath that was about to commence. They did not want the bodies remaining on the cross during the Sabbath. Now, typically in a Roman crucifixion, you'll have criminals who will be there not just for hours, but for days. And on a normal circumstance, the Jews might allow that if it was on Monday through Friday. But this is going to be the Sabbath, Saturday. They asked Pilate if the legs of the criminals could be broken, that will speed up the death process. It'll get it over with before the sundown. Well, Pilate said yes, and so they went to the thieves and they broke their legs. That will bring their death very quickly. But we're also told that they went to Jesus and found he was already dead. He died that afternoon at 3 o'clock. Now, once they discovered he was dead, they still got to certify it. So one of the soldiers took a spear. He pierced the side of Jesus. He's probably aiming for the heart. And as he did, he pierced the heart. Blood with some water began to flow. And now it was time to take the body of Jesus off the cross, as well as those other two bodies, and remove them before the Sabbath began. It was Joseph of Arimathea, we're told, who came to claim the body of Jesus. Now, the disciples of Jesus, his apostles, they're hiding. John was there, but even John doesn't step forward to claim the body, for whatever reason. And so Joseph claims the body. Now, who was Joseph? We're told in John chapter 19 he was a secret disciple of Jesus. And why was it a secret? It says he was afraid of the Jews. Now, Joseph had some good reasons to be afraid of the Jews. First, he's a wealthy man, and siding with Jesus could be costly for him. Also, he was a member of the Centurion council. He's one of the fellows who showed up for the trial of Jesus and voted on whether or not to condemn Jesus to death. Now, Luke tells us that he was a good man, he was a righteous man, and he did not consent to their plan and action. He probably raised some kind of objections, probably not too strenuously. He may have voted when the time came and voted no. But still, he was in a delicate position. So Joseph had been a secret disciple. But that secret's about to come out because he went to Pilate and requested the body of Jesus. Time was running out. You only had from the time of death, 3 o'clock, to the release of the body, to 6 o'clock, sundown, to get that body buried somewhere. We're told that Joseph used a tomb that he owned. It was near the place where Jesus was crucified. It was in a garden. And he quickly put the body in there. It would have to be dealt with on another day. All of this was finished by sundown. Now, this day that Jesus died, we now traditionally refer to it as Good Friday. But I look at it and think, it wasn't so good for Jesus. I wonder if that title is a misnomer. Because you're saying a good day when he suffered all that he suffered. He was mocked and humiliated, and he died, and we call that a Good Friday. It's the old English word, good. And the idea of someone being righteous, pure, and holy. You see, the phrase Good Friday actually means sacred Friday, holy Friday, because Friday was a special day in the sight of God. And traditionally, we've treated it as a special day. In fact, there's a lot of traditions in different parts of the world where they have restrictions on what activities are inappropriate on a Good Friday. I think American culture has lost a lot of that respect for the sacred. Many of us, however, we still practice it. For us, Good Friday is a special day. We treat it that way. You know, if you think about the story of Jesus on the cross on that Good Friday, it was a difficult day to witness. But it was also an important day for sinners. Because on that day, we had an atonement sacrifice for our sins that God accepted, said yes to. As because of what happened on the cross, that you and I are forgiven, we're saved. You know, the cross is the heart of the gospel. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 22, he says, that's what I preach. Now, my audience doesn't necessarily like it, but that's what I preach. The Jews, they'll ask for a sign. The Greeks will ask for words of wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified. And for the Jews, that's a stumbling block. They have a hard time accepting the idea. For the Gentiles, it's foolishness. It doesn't make sense. But to those of us who are called, for those of us who've answered the call, and whether you're Jew or Greek, it doesn't matter. The cross of Christ is the power and wisdom of God. It's the grand theme of worship in heaven, according to the book of Revelation, where they sing, "Worthy is the Lamb that was slain." This is a great event in history, and it happened on that Good Friday. Good Friday was a terrible day for Jesus, but a blessed day for the saints, and it brings us to the end of the road to Calvary. I want to thank you for joining me in these 10-minute daily Bible studies. And we're not done sheltering in place yet. We can't come back and do our gatherings and our lessons together. And so, the Monday after Easter, we'll continue with our 10-minute Bible studies. This time, the lesson series, The Path to Glory. We'll pick up where we left off and watch the story, as the Gospels tell us, of the resurrection of Jesus and the 40 days that led up to his ascension to the glory of heaven. I'll see you then.